We've talked about some of the various facets of cultural intelligence, and right now, as we kind of wrap things up, we want to take a look at the application of a lot of this knowledge that we've been taking in through the course of this term. As research has been done on developing cultural competency, there are two things that have consistently emerged for meaningful cross-cultural experiences to take place. One of them is active engagement. So it's not simply enough to take in a bunch of knowledge. You actually have to go out and begin to engage and make application of the principles that you're learning. The second thing is meaningful reflection. And what I mean by that is there has to be time that's intentionally set aside to reflect on the various cross-cultural encounters that you have. One of the things that I encountered early on as I was leading teams of students overseas is there was a desire to maximize, we're there 7 days or 10 days, and so we would run from 6 in the morning until 10 o'clock at night. And students would have all these experiences, they would have all this learning that was taking place, but there was no time that was ever built in to process that. And as research has been done, what we found is that 6 months, a year later, without having time to sit back and reflect at multiple points along the way and evaluate those, make adjustments and changes, that retention doesn't stay there, and the likelihood of someone actually implementing that in their future drastically decreases. So as you're moving forward from here, and you're working on your action plans and you're taking that content, keep that in mind that you want to always be looking for ways to engage with other people. But then when you have those encounters, you want to take some time, whether it's later on in the day or that night or the next morning, whatever works best for you, to sit down, and I recommend pen in hand, and begin to write and reflect on the experience and think through and process through it and make adjustments as they take place. One of the things that I appreciate about the cultural intelligence framework is that cultural intelligence is something that can be improved. There's a lot of assessment tools out there and personality profiles, and we take a look at them. And sometimes it can be a little bit discouraging whenever we take a look at them and go, oh, I wish I was this, or I wish I was that. And the reality is that most people have the capacity to improve their cultural intelligence, their cultural competency. It is a skill that can be developed. Maybe one way to look at that is on a scale of 1 to 5, and I'd like to just kind of talk through what that might look like. When we talk about that level 1, that's where you react to something that happens to you. You react to some sort of external stimuli. For example, you walk into a room, you encounter someone, and you're talking with them, but they're silent. Well, level 1 is you're going to interpret that in light of your cultural understanding with your home culture. Okay? So we start to move to level 2, you begin to recognize that there are other cultural norms. And you're motivated to learn about different cultures and how, what are the reasons for some of those differences. So for example, you're in a meeting and you observe someone silent, you begin to wonder, I wonder if that means the same thing in their culture it is in my culture. By level 3, you've kind of moved beyond that, and you're starting to begin to accommodate other cultural norms. So you can explain the way that cultural impacts things, and you're actually able to explain why, for example, in that encounter, although you don't know for sure, you're able to explain why that individual might be silent in that situation. By level 4, you have the ability to adapt, and you start adjusting your thinking processes and your behaviors to other cultural norms. So you're observing some individuals are silent in a meeting, and you intentionally ask for their input, believing that they might consider it disrespectful to offer it unless they're otherwise asked to give it. Some specific changes are starting to take place at this point. By level 5, you automatically start to adjust your thinking and behavior when appropriate cues, and usually this is subconscious. Now, throughout this conversation on cultural intelligence, we've talked through how intuition can sometimes get you in trouble, and usually does early on in the cultural adaptation process. Because what's intuitive to us is directly related to our home culture, what is natural to us. But it is possible, as learning takes place, for intuition to kind of take over, and you're automatically subconsciously adjusting to other cultural norms. And it's amazing how that can stick with you. I saw this a couple years ago when I was teaching in one of my classrooms, and I had a Korean student in my classroom. I hadn't been to Korea in 12 years at that point. One of the things, and this is a very simple example, but one of the observations that I made while I was there are different hand gestures. In the Korean culture, it was disrespectful to, when you needed someone's attention, to call them, to wave to them like this. That's how you would wave a dog over. Instead, you would do something like this right here. I hadn't thought about that in years. Well, there was a Korean student in my classroom, and I was walking through the roll one day, and it was pretty loud in the classroom, and I needed to talk with her in class, and I caught her eye on the back of the class, and I was looking back. I just did this right here, and I wasn't even thinking about it. There was all these other stimuli taking place. Several students up front kind of laughed at me because it looked odd to them, and I wasn't even aware until they started laughing how intuition had actually taken over, and I wasn't even aware of what was taking place. It was just from the amount of time spent in culture. So there really is hope that regardless of where we fall on that continuum of cross-cultural understanding, there's hope for all of us that change can actually take place. Several years ago, Liberty had a program that they did in connection with another university in Korea. And Liberty took a team of their students over, and there was a summer English program, and we're, have our students in there, and we're working with, side by side with Koreans in this English language program. And what we did is we had one American student in with 2 or 3 Koreans through the course of the program. We were doing conversational English with them. They were in formal classes in the mornings and the afternoons. I mean, we were going all over the country and really just interacting with them. And as opportunities arose, looking for opportunities to share the gospel. Well, there were a couple of guys on this trip who, quite frankly, were just a couple of knuckleheads. And one of them in particular, he had lived in Korea before. His father was in the military, so he lived in Korea. He had already been previous summers to teach English there. So he kind of came into the situation really confident, quite frankly, a bit arrogant about the knowledge that he had. And the reality was, he was pretty culturally clueless. Worse, he was unaware that he was culturally clueless. It's one thing to be culturally clueless, but to not even be aware of that takes it to a different level. Well, there were a number of inappropriate things that was happening, and these were, fun-loving guys. They're goofing off, laughing all the time, but they were totally unaware of how they were being perceived by the Korean nationals. Well, it kind of culminated, the whole program culminated where we took the students to a resort up in the mountains, very, very famous mountain region. And then close to the mountain region, you had the beaches that were there. We had one of the Korean directors who was in charge of the program. And I remember as everyone's getting on the bus, here's the Korean director, and he's talking about going to the beach, and he's talking about the ocean that we're going to go to, and he was talking about how cold the water was. And this is a very low-risk culture. And what he conveyed to everyone is, whenever we get there, you need to slowly get into the water, but don't plunge into the water right away because people can have heart attacks. Well, these 2 guys thought this was the funniest thing in the world, that I'm going to go to the beach, they're going to be in the water, and I'm going to have a heart attack. And so they're kind of joking about it on the bus. Well, they get out there to it, out to the ocean, walk in the water, and as soon as they step foot in the water, they jump in, pop out of the water, and they're going, oh, pretending to have a heart attack. Well, this one guy looks over, and there's the director staring him straight in the eye. There couldn't have been a more insulting thing to do to the director of the program after 8 weeks of accommodating our students, and the guy felt horrible, and he didn't know what to do. With some shame and a whole lot of hope, I can tell you that that student was me. I was someone who was totally clueless, even though I had spent a lot of experiences overseas, and did a whole lot of offending people in the process of having a really good desire to help other people. And what would be a hilarious thing to do with a bunch of friends here was something that really had the capacity to destroy the relationships with the people that we cared most about. So when I talk about the fact that there's hope for people, there's hope for everyone, that we can grow in our cultural intelligence, we can develop as mature people who, although we have the best of intentions about how to share our faith, really need some further coaching and training and education and development and practice to actually put all of that into action. I hope that as we've walked through this course together, that you've had opportunities to reflect along the way, to reflect about Jesus and what he's done in your life, to reflect about some of the ways that you can begin to engage those that you love and care about the most. I would ask this, that where Jesus has spoken to you clearly, where he's placed things on your heart to think about and to pray about and consider doing, I would encourage you to obey, whatever that might look like. Jesus asks us to do some crazy things sometimes, but the confidence we have in that is Christ in us, the hope of glory, and that there's nothing that he's going to ask of us that we don't have the capacity to do because of him, not because of the skills that we have.